Good evening. Have you ever had a thought, a yearning, a feeling in your stomach that you knew you were right, an absolute truth? But actually, it's my desire. And I'll get to that in a moment. Because I know that this truth is something that I can't let go of. Gandhi said that even if you are a minority of one, that it's still the truth. So I figure I'm in pretty good company. And that truth is compassion with understanding. Because you see, I understand what happens when you lack compassion for another human. You destroy their dignity. But I am convinced that with compassion, you restore dignity and you bring grace back to humanity. And this is the moment where you're probably thinking, well, why do you care so much, Charlene? Well, it's a story that seems like it's vivid imagination. Somebody with a vivid imagination would be able to make up, because it can't possibly be real. But as water was rushing into my home in Seattle, and kept rising rapidly and relentlessly, she was behind a door trapped, and she said, I need you to be my hero and get me out. Be my hero. Well, the water was relentless, as I said, and it left me with no option but to leave and to get out, because I too was going to drown. And a dive team was deployed. Would it be a rescue or a recovery of her body? Charlene, we have her. We have a pulse. And I thought for a moment, is this some miracle of the blessed? Because you see, for the first time in my life, I had felt blessed beyond measure. Because for 33 years, I had a shame and a denial of who I was. And I was finally being the person that I knew I was. And she knew who I was. And she thought I could do anything. But that night I realized I was no superhero. I was a mere mortal, foiled by a storm that raged without consideration. They say that when you survive a trauma, that you're forever changed beyond your will. I would agree with that statement. When I was a small child, I learned very early how to navigate abuse, neglect, anger, yelling. I actually became kind of an expert at ducking and covering. But I thought it was my hell. But what I later realized, that it was just the training facility that would later be recalled in 2006. And so, hearing of that story, you probably are thinking, that's impossible. But that's really only half the story. The other half was when I got to the hospital, and I was deemed no one. I was told that I had no rights. I was like, I have no rights. It seems impossible for me to even understand. It was as if someone was speaking a different language. But 10 years was no measure of who we were. And I started to recall that young woman, that little girl, who was trying to just survive. So I did what I had to do. And I found a cell phone, and I called information, and I got somebody on the phone 3,000 miles away who would say, yes, she can be there. And I was resolute because I realized that I was no superhero, but I wanted to avenge her honor. And so I've told of this story to senators, governors, college students, small children, and the president. Because I know that I may be standing here as one person, but I'm actually a community of many, and it's continuing to happen. We're continually being told, you don't matter. You are no one. Sit down. The first time I told the story, it was at a Senate hearing in Washington State when we were considering just some of the rights of marriage. Actually, 10 rights There are 1,138 for the record. And I was in this room and I could feel this energy. And it was this room of collective souls wondering what this fractured heart was going to say. That was finally going to get them understand the collateral damage of inequality. But it was too much to be contained in that room. And it continues to be too much to be contained in any room. It spills out with the frustration, with the disbelief that we continue to have this discussion in 2013. I often am amazed at the discussion around equality. I've had many debates, many discussions, many moments of really ugly conversation regarding who I am, who we are as my community. Can't you just call it something else, they say? Call it something else for God's sake. And this is the moment when I say, for God's sake or your sake? But I also realize that it comes down to, we're not like them. But they're right. We aren't like them because we're asked to produce papers. We're asked to jump through hoops. We're asked to prove who we are. But it's their differences and their fears and their worries and their God that keeps us from full and inclusive equality in this country. So how did this all start? Well, in 1996, President Clinton signed one of the most damaging pieces of legislation for LGBT families, and it was called the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, or as we've all gotten to know it as DOMA. And what DOMA does is it discriminates against LGBT families who have the right of marriage in a state. Because once we receive rights in that state, they mean absolutely nothing once we leave that state. Currently, we have a handful of states. But it was when Hawaii said, hey, we're going to allow marriage for same-sex couples. And they went, oh, no, you're not. Because that means we'll have to give you federal benefits, which include Social Security benefits, survivor benefits. The list goes on to 1,138 rights and privileges and benefits. And I always marvel at the people who are opposed to this, that they rarely, if ever think about the amount of rights that they have. But more importantly, they don't even have to think about it. And the only thing they have to do is say, I do. And so, what do we do with this information? How do we work through the inequality? The justices of the Supreme Court just heard oral arguments on 2 cases that clearly define that DOMA is unconstitutional. With everything in my heart, I'm hoping it's the breaking point, the moment that shows the highest court. Our lives sit in the hand of 9 justices. Justice Alito gave one of the most riveting comments. He said, well, you know, gay marriage really hasn't been around for that long. I think it's been since, 2000 in the Netherlands? You know, that's newer than the advent of the cell phone or the internet. And I thought, marriage? But maybe Justice Alito was trying to say equality. Justice Kennedy, who likely will be the swing vote, said that, what about the children? What about the harm to children? I'm sure heads were spinning because no one expected him to say that. What about the harm to the children? These children want their parents to have this right. And I was sitting there going, you're right. They have no voice, he said. And I said, but I can be a voice for someone. And her name is Etta. And she's my tickle buddy. And I'm constantly in trouble for winding her up into a froth before bedtime. And then I hold her as she drinks her bottle and she tries to reach for my curls to try to get me to play just one more time with her. Come on, Ma. So yes, justices, it does cause harm. Because you see, we are mothers and we're fathers and we're husbands and we're wives. And we bury our dead, and we live our lives. And we go to work each day as doctors and lawyers, laborers. And we come home at night, and we hold our babies, and we kiss goodnight our superheroes. And we wait. But more likely we desire. We desire when equality will be looked upon with compassion, which restores dignity and gives us all grace. Thank you very much.